The diamond necklace was supposed to be hers. 6 months pregnant, Bryony Sloane stood in the silence of her marble kitchen, her hand on the curve of her belly, staring at the velvet box her husband had just snapped shut. His words still rang in her ears, cold, clipped and final. "You're not event-ready." The necklace, the gala, even the role of wife, he had given them all to another woman. But what Elias Fallner never imagined was that the wife he discarded would return that very night, holding the hand of the billionaire who could destroy him. The box looked small from a distance, a black square on a glacier of Carrara marble. Up close it became a bruise, dark, tender, impossible to ignore. Bryony stared at it, as if staring might change what had already been spoken, as if the diamond necklace inside could return to being a promise rather than a weapon. "It's simple," Elias said, straightening a cufflink with the practiced indifference of men who never have to clean up their own spills. "You're not event-ready, Bree. The optics matter. It's one night." The words were clipped, the tone surgical. The man who used to lilt her name like a melody now used it as a scalpel. He didn't meet her eyes. He admired himself in the chrome curve of the espresso machine, watched his face sharpen and glow. "Optics?" she asked. Her voice felt like it belonged to someone else, thinner, airless. "What are we, Elias? A product shot?" "We," he said, adjusting his bow tie, "are about to close the biggest relationship this firm has seen. Roger Davies will be there, so will 3 senators, the paparazzi, donors. I need to project unencumbered energy." "Unencumbered," she repeated softly, letting the word sit in the room like poison. "Is that what our son is?" A muscle in his jaw jumped. He finally looked at her, not with love, not even with annoyance, worse, with that gentle parental patience you reserve for someone you plan to ignore. "Don't be dramatic. You're tired. Your ankles are swollen. You said so yourself this morning. Take the night to rest." "And the necklace?" He shrugged, as if distributing property were a housekeeping note. "It shouldn't sit in a box. It needs to be seen. Katrina's going in my place," she finished. She'd seen the late-night texts, the urgent scope questions, the photos in restaurant mirrors where he was just out of frame. She'd seen the way Katrina's smile never quite reached her eyes. She'd seen all of it and pushed it into a neat file labeled later. It burned in the open air. He lifted the box, then put it back down, perhaps out of a remnant of politeness. "We're on the cusp, Bree. Don't make this harder." He left behind the smell of cologne and a silence that roared. She held the edge of the island with both hands and breathed until the room stopped tilting. Somewhere beneath the panic, a steadier pulse knocked, a kick, soft but insistent, under her ribs. She placed her palm against the swell and found herself whispering, "It's okay. I know." She walked to the bathroom and sat on the warmed floor, back against cool marble. The tiles were a chessboard, order laid underfoot, and she realized with a blink how much of her life had become that, keeping squares aligned so the pieces moved the way he wanted. Tears came then, hot and humiliating, not just for the ball or the necklace, but for the quiet years of deferring her own blueprints to sketch out his. She had not always been the woman who edited speeches and selected cufflinks. Once, in a sunlit office with mismatched chairs, she'd been the woman with maps pinned to walls, elevations, old right-of-way diagrams, community survey data, planning a park on a warehouse roof in the Bronx. Urban canvas, they'd called it. Skeletal funding, fierce ideas. That was where she had met eyes that made her feel seen rather than looked at. Donovan Knight had appeared after a board session she'd thought had gone nowhere. "Your vision is 20 years early," he had said, dry and oddly warm. "The board will fund a safer wing, but the city will come round. When it does, call." He had slid a black card with a name and a number across the table. No assistants, no gatekeepers. A line drawn not through a committee, but directly to him. The card lived in a keepsake box, Old ticket stubs, a napkin with a sketch of an impossible bridge, her grandmother's recipe for plum cake. She fetched it now with shaking hands. The bold white type glowed against matte black. She put the card on the counter and stared at it. The idea of calling felt absurd, childish, needy. He was sponsoring the gala. He would be there, somewhere above the crowd he hated. He wouldn't remember. And if he did, this was not his problem to solve. This wasn't about being rescued. It couldn't be. Another knock from inside, a rhythmic reminder. She swallowed the lump in her throat like a bitter pill. The call wouldn't be about the hurt. It would be about architecture, the kind that holds up after shaking. She dialed. It rang twice. Knight. His voice was low, direct, no flourish. She nearly hung up. Mr. Knight, Donovan, my name is Bryony Sloan. Years ago I pitched Urban Canvas. You gave me your card. Her words scattered. She caught them and stacked them with effort. You said call when the world caught up. It hasn't. But something else has. A pause. She saw the city at their windows in miniature, towers like lit metronomes ticking out other people's certainty. Miss Sloan, he said, you wanted to build a park atop a derelict warehouse. You made a case the board couldn't hear. I told them they were fools. There was a wry exhale. I remember. The relief left her dizzy. I wasn't going to call, she admitted, but tonight, my husband... The sentence snagged. Fine, get to the point. There's a gala you're sponsoring. The room will be full of exactly the people who can either open doors or weld them shut. I cannot be erased tonight. I need to be there as myself, not as anyone's plus one. I intend to relaunch my work. I need a partner. Silence hummed. She pictured him scowling at a laptop, checking time zones, calculating optics of his own. I despise bullies, he said, the words flat, heavy as a gavel. And I detest men who confuse optics with substance. Be ready in 90 minutes. A car will be at the service entrance. You aren't coming as a date. You're coming as my partner. A beat. Wear something that makes you feel powerful. He ended the call. The word powerful echoed like a bell. She stood on ankles he had called swollen and walked into the closet. On Elias's side, navy, charcoal, midnight, labels in safe fonts. On hers, soft knits, silk shells, maternity dresses chosen for comfort rather than stagecraft. And then, at the far back, in a garment bag, a siren she'd never dared answer. Deep emerald silk, a cut that emphasized rather than excused, a neckline that said the word woman without apology, empire waist, flowing skirt. A chance. She stepped into it. The fabric whispered up her skin. It fit not perfectly, but truthfully. She took her jewelry box down and passed the small, tasteful things she'd learned to select for rooms where she was expected to be supportive but not bright. Beneath them lay her grandmother's legacy, platinum and onyx, angles and courage. The necklace settled at her collarbones with a cool certainty. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. A team is at your service entrance. They're from me. Let them in. DK. The bell rang. The woman who introduced herself as Lena assessed the dress, the necklace, the face. We won't hide the pregnancy, she said, calm, competent. We honor it. The man, George, moved like a shadow, checking lines of sight, confirming routes with someone she couldn't see. He spoke once into his sleeve. Asset is secure. Extraction in 10. No press. She almost laughed. A few hours ago, she had been a situation. Now she was an asset. She let Lena angle her chin, lift her hair, brush warmth onto skin that had gone ash pale. When the last pin slid into place, the woman in the mirror looked like someone who could draw a skyline without shaking. Her phone dinged again. A photo. Elias and Katrina in a mirror, diamonds bright at the throat they didn't belong to. Caption, wish you were here, having a great time. The pity in her smile surprised her. She deleted the message and followed George to the service elevator. The car that waited under the city was dark and discreet, a chassis that implied rather than declared. As it slid into traffic, she rested a hand on the life that had made her brave and allowed herself, for the first time that day, to breathe all the way to the bottom of her lungs. Tonight would not be about getting even, it would be about getting free. The car didn't turn toward the Grand Plaza. It cut downtown through bands of yellow cabs and late commuters, braking in front of a brownstone with a door like a secret, ivy climbing its frame, brass polished to a glow. "Mr. Knight prefers a side entrance," George said. "Avoids the scrum." The door opened as they reached for it. Donovan Knight stood framed by warm light, long lines, no wasted movement. He looked like the city if the city had a human face. Not pretty, but inevitable. "Miss Sloane," he said. His eyes took her in. Dress, necklace, the set of her shoulders. A small nod that landed like a contract. "You look like a woman who knows the span and load-bearing limits of her own design." "I intend to," she said, and found her voice had steel in it. He led her not to a salon, but to a room humming with quiet machinery. One wall was all screen, a mosaic of the gala. The red carpet, the roped-off press, the faces of people who mistook being seen for being significant. "Reconnaissance," he gestured. "Know the terrain. There's Davies. He respects money and power in exactly that order. Next to him, Senator Michelson, Urban Development Committee, useful and cautious. And—" he paused, lips quirking. "Your husband, preening. Let him warm the cameras before we walk in." He said husband as if naming a variable, not a person, a factor to anticipate and neutralize. "I meant what I said on the phone," Donovan continued. He picked up a slim black portfolio and offered it to her. "You're not my date. You're my partner. The Knight Foundation will seed your initiative with $5 million. Feasibility on 3 sites you once proposed, plus capacity to hire a team. It moves tonight, if you say yes." Her name was printed on the first page. Sloane Initiative. Crisp, elegant, not embellishment, but signature. Her fingers trembled. "Why?" she asked. The question surprised even her. "Why me? Why now?" "Because you despise my husband." "I don't know your husband," he said, a corner of his mouth tilting. "I know types. I also know the first few minutes of your urban canvas talk by heart. You didn't sell a park. You argued for lungs. You made an old man think like a 19-year-old idealist for 5 minutes. That's rare. I hoard it. The timing. You called when my name on your shoulder will not simply help. It will clarify." "Clarify what?" "That substance was in the room all along and nobody looked. You don't need rescuing, Ms. Sloane. You need amplification." Amplification. She rolled the word in her mouth like a sip of something stronger than water. In the mirror above a side table, Lena's work caught the light. The pregnancy, which had felt like a liability an hour ago, looked like a coronation now. The line of her lifted neck, the onyx points, the emerald fall. "You'll be photographed," Donovan said. "You good with that?" "I don't want a circus." "You made a choice 90 minutes ago that precludes invisibility." He looked back at the screens. "We don't borrow the circus. We own the tent." He glanced down at his watch. Cocktail hour rises, attention wanes. We enter at the trough. We greet Michelson first. 2 sentences about stormwater remediation and youth employment. He's yours. We do not look at Davies until he looks at us. He will, and he will adjust. When, if, your husband intercepts, you'll introduce me as your business partner and use your maiden name. It is both accurate and the most efficient cut. The thought hit like cold water. The name had always still been hers in private places, on notebooks, inside jackets. Hearing him speak the tactic out loud turned sentiment into instrument. "Is that cruel?" she asked before she could stop herself. "It's structural," he replied. "Names are beams. Put them where they hold weight." George appeared in the doorway. "Vehicle is staged, entrance in 12. Donovan offered his arm without flourish. "One last thing," he said. "You will be tempted to feel grateful tonight. Don't. Feel ready." They rode in silence, broken only by the city, lights smearing across windows like watercolor. The Grand Plaza reared up, gilded and arrogant, the kind of building that insisted on itself. As they waited in a shadowed corridor off the main doors, Lena's final text arrived. "You look magnificent. Remember who you are." Bryony slid the phone into her clutch and curled her fingers around Donovan's for one grounding breath. He did not squeeze back. He held steady, like a handrail built to code. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. "Let's own the tent." The doors opened, not with a creak, but with a letting in. Sound poured, strings, chatter, the weird little gasps people make when they smell money. A ripple ran through the crowd, something biological, a school of fish parting for a shark. They did not stride, they did not strut. They moved as if the room had been built to receive them, as if every chandelier had been hung to light their path. Cameras flashed, a strobe weatherfront. Eyes swung. A murmur, "Who is she?" carried like mist. Donovan did not break pace. He aimed them at the cluster near the stage where Michelson was already turning, hand extended, antennae up. "Senator," Donovan said, "you should meet my partner, Ms. Bryony Sloan, founder of the Sloan Initiative. We're aligning Greenway design with workforce training in districts you've earmarked for flood mitigation." Michelson's eyebrows went up. "We are? That would be a blessed relief." He focused on her, not the man beside her, a sign she clocked and stored. "Ms. Sloan, I've read about Urban Canvas. Your cost per acre figures were aggressive." "They were what it would cost if we stopped pretending public space doesn't pay dividends," she said, finding a grin. "And if we leveraged rooftops you already own." "Ha," he said, warmed. "Walk me through your numbers next week." "Monday," Donovan said, smiling as if simply scheduling the sunrise. They moved on in a glide, not their own. People unmoored themselves from conversations to be in their orbit, the way people do when they sense the field is shifting and don't want to be caught on the wrong side of the fault. By the time they neared Davies, the man's granite expression had melted around the edges. His eyes were on her, not Elias, which would have been funny if it weren't so precise. And there, just beyond, was Elias, with Katrina glittering painfully beside him, her hand on his arm the way a person steadies themselves at the edge of a cliff. His smile, so good on billboards, so practiced at closings, wobbled. "Brian," he began. She turned first to Donovan, because that's how control looks. "Mr. Fallner," Donovan said, ice in velvet. "I believe you're acquainted with Miss Sloan." The maiden name landed like a measured blow. She watched Elias flinch. Katrina's eyes slid to the necklace at Bryony's throat and then, to her credit, back to her face. "That dress," Katrina said, brittle. "Brave." Bryony almost said thank you and decided against generosity that would be mistaken for permission. "It's functional," she said instead. "I find armor helps." Donovan moved them on before Elias could reply, and she didn't look back. "Breathe," Donovan said, quiet, as they approached the stage where a news anchor in a silver sheath was thanking the committee between sips of sparkling water. "Next beats the auction." "What happens there?" "Money postures. We redirect." "How does one redirect money?" "By giving it a better story." The anchor's voice rose. Waiters began to sweep the periphery clean of empties, a tide pulling back. The first lot went fast. Art. The second, vacation, giggled its way to a hedge fund wife. The third, naming rights for a pediatric wing, thickened the air. The room leaned forward, scenting validation. Elias's arm came up, paddle smooth. 1 million, he called, and the sound of it was a man trying to reboot a narrative. 1,000,002, someone else said. 1,500, Elias announced louder. Cameras found him again, thank God, his relief broadcast in pause. The auctioneer milked the moment. 1.5 on my left. Going once, going twice. 5, Donovan said without raising a hand. Silence dropped. It didn't matter that he hadn't said million. It hung there anyway. The auctioneer stammered. 5 million from Mr. Knight. Donovan held up his hand, a conductor summoning a change. Correction. The Knight Foundation funds the pediatric wing as a matter of course. My 5 tonight is for something else." He turned to the room, then to her, and the pivot itself wrote a headline. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, casual as a dinner toast and somehow more electric than the chandeliers. "Tonight launches the Sloan Initiative, led by Ms. Bryony Sloan, green infrastructure built where it's needed most, designed to employ and endure. Consider this our first brick." He didn't say her husband's name, he didn't have to. For a second, nothing moved. Then the applause arrived. Not the brittle clack of obligation, but the kind that starts at sternums and comes out of palms. She felt her heart punching at her ribs and told it, "Yes, fine, okay. Be loud." She did not look over her shoulder where she knew a man was trying to swallow a room. She looked forward. The thing about power is that it has a sound. It is not the clamour we associate with it. It is the way a busy place thins to leave a channel. As the applause ebbed, the ballroom rearranged itself, like iron filings turned by a magnet. People who spent their careers pretending not to know where advantage lay now remembered. They found her. "It's an honor," said a woman with a museum title longer than her wrist. "We've got a 4-block corridor with no shade. Could your team prototype canopy greens?" "We can," Bryony said, and heard the "we" as new, not her, not an apology, a set of tools in motion. A developer she once begged for a meeting now angled his body towards her, as if he could absorb her momentum through osmosis. "We've got rooftops we can't lease," he said. "Could be a pilot." "Send elevations," she replied, and took his card not like a favor but like a bid. Roger Davies materialized with a smile that did not empty his eyes. "Ms. Sloan," he said, like a man introducing himself to gravity. "I've heard about your work." "You saw it," she corrected quietly. "You just didn't know you were looking." Donovan coughed what might have been a laugh. Davies's gaze flitted once, toward a figure on the edge of the crowd, then returned, recalibrating. "Mr. Knight's support speaks loudly." "Not louder than the projects will," she said. "You'll want to visit when we break ground. Bring boots." His mouth twitched. "I will." There were handshakes, cards, the choreography of influence, a dance she'd watched while holding coats, now dancing without asking permission. She moved through it with instinct, not to punish anyone, not to win small wars, but because the map had always been in her head, and someone had finally given her the pen. "Is your husband always this quiet?" Donovan murmured once they had a sliver of space by a column. "He talks a lot when he's winning," she said. "He doesn't recognize what losing sounds like." Across the room, Katrina was pale in a way makeup cannot fix. She had lost the diamond smile, and with it the thread that connected her to relevance. Bryony felt a brief, acute sadness for a young woman who had bet on optics and forgotten content. Then she let the feeling go. The anchor returned to the mic, offering closing thanks, rinsing the event in gratitude. Waiters reappeared like synchronized swimmers, the band struck a standard, and the floor blurred into pairs. Donovan didn't ask to dance. He kept her near the edge, where conversations happened and deals got sketched on linen napkins. "2 more passes," he said. "Then we ghost." "Ghost? Leave without saying goodbye. Keeps the narrative clean. Never stay long enough for the 3rd photo. That's how you turn into wallpaper." "Do you have a manual for this?" she asked. "I write it as I go." He checked his watch and something softened in his face, just a fraction. "How are you?" "Strangely calm," she said. "Hungry?" "We should have fed you," he said, annoyed with himself. He flagged a waiter and commandeered canapes like a pirate of compassion. "Eat, you're building Rome tonight." She took a bite, and the room sharpened. At the edge of her sightline, Elias finally moved toward them, roped by equal parts pride and panic. "Brie," he said, stopping close enough to smell the champagne on his breath, not close enough to be in her light. "Can we talk?" "We're working," she said, and the "we" hung between them like a no trespassing sign. "Working," he repeated, sneering tread lightly across his tone. "What is this, a stunt? You called him, after I asked you?" "You replaced me with your associate and called it strategy," she said, keeping her voice low, even. I called a partner and called it what it is. I told you the optics. Optics didn't fund anything tonight, she said. Substance did. He looked at Donovan as if making eye contact might reorient the universe. You don't know her. You think this is... I know talent, Donovan said, conversational as weather. I don't acquire people. I invest in work. Good evening, Mr. Fellner. He turned away and she went with him, and Elias for once had no line to throw that would bring her back. They exited clean, with only a rustle of curiosity in their wake, not lingering long enough to let anyone talk them into a selfie or out of a principle. In the car, Donovan let his head fall back against the leather and exhaled for what might have been the first time that night. Phase 2 starts now, he said. What's Phase 2? Monday. We carve time on the senator's calendar. We get you a leased loft to work in by Wednesday. We hire an ops lead and a design lead by Friday. We annoy a few people who need annoying. We pay for coffee. She laughed, and it sounded like a window opening. My grandmother used to say, she told him, eyes on the blur of city as they crossed back downtown, that every demolition is a love letter to the building that should have stood there instead. He nodded. Then let's write in ink. At the brownstone, George returned her phone. Press is already warming up, he said. We can put a short statement on the wire, nothing thirsty. She typed. Tonight we announced the Sloan Initiative with seed funding from the Knight Foundation. Our mission is simple. Build green infrastructure that works for the people who live beside it. This city deserves lungs, not fig leaves. Good, Donovan said, reading over her shoulder. You write like an engineer. Is that a compliment? The highest. On the stoop, the night air had the particular city cool that slides under even the best coat. Donovan glanced at her arm. You're shaking. Adrenaline, she said, and the realization that I never ate dinner. He frowned at himself again. We'll fix that in Phase 3, but for now, rest. Tomorrow we start playing the long game. The car took her home not to the penthouse, but to a hotel with sheets that didn't know her name. A deliberate choice. George checked the hall before she swiped. Lena had left a small bag on the bed, flats, a soft t-shirt, a bottle of something that smelled like chamomile and competence. Bryony washed her face and watched the woman in the mirror take off her armor. The onyx necklace lay cool and content on the dresser. She touched her belly. We did it, she whispered. A kick answered. She fell asleep mid-smile. In another part of the city, a man scrolled through headlines with a scowl that deepened into a tremor. But that was a different story, and for the first time in years, not her job to manage. High society loves a neat narrative, especially when it comes packaged with diamonds and humiliation. The story of the night spread like a chemical bloom. A spurned wife arrives hand in hand with the reclusive donor. The husband bids, the donor doubles, then reframes. The wife becomes not a pity object, but a principle. It was too archetypal to resist. By morning, a column called The Verdict posted a recap that read like a ballet dancer wielding a scalpel. The headline did what headlines do. Elevated, simplified, skewered. But even in the barbs there was an accidental fairness. The column grasped that the room had not simply clapped for money. It had clapped for direction. At 11, Elias's phone rang with the tone he used for people who mattered. Mr. Davies, he said, putting a smile on his voice and his shoes on his feet at the same time. Now, the assistant said, and hung up. The elevator ride to the top floor stretched. He passed desks where heads turned and ducked, the wave that overtakes an office when the weather changes. It smelled like coffee and fear. Roger Davies didn't make him sit. He stood with his back to the window and waited until Elias closed the door. I built this firm on 2 principles, Davies said, voice low, clipped, the way you talk when you want the words to bruise. Strength, foresight. Last night you showed neither. Elias opened his mouth to argue optics and strategy and the unfairness of billionaires, but Davies picked up a paper from his desk, ink on pink stock, and tapped it with a finger. What matters isn't that Knight outbid you. He can outbid anyone. What matters is that you walked into a room carrying a live wire and electrified nothing. You didn't read the room. You didn't read your life. That story, Elias began, but Davies continued as if the interjection were a fly. You had a partner, a mind we would have paid to keep adjacent. You chose a prop instead, and then you paraded the choice through a camera gauntlet. You handed a man who turns checks into leverage a queen, and you smiled while you did it. Elias wanted to protest. He wanted to say, but she was tired, and my plan was, and you said impressions, Roger, you said impressions. He wanted to say, Katrina looks good on a step and repeat. He wanted to pick up the necklace in his pocket like a talisman and find it warm. Nothing came that didn't sound like a child pleading not to be sent to his room. You will clear your desk by noon, Davies said. You will receive what the contract requires and no more, and you will not, do you understand me, not use your building access to talk to junior staff. We're not letting your rot spread. The word rot landed. Elias felt the floor shift. Roger, he said, trying for wounded dignity and landing in a puddle. Door, Davies said. The corridor looked longer on the way back. The elevator took a century to arrive. He could feel eyes he didn't meet examining the back of his jacket and assigning it to a future in New Jersey. On the street, wind made knives of the air. He started walking because the alternative was standing still. The city, which had always felt to him like an asset he deserved, now felt like a market that had corrected. Inside a cafe, he watched on his phone as a clip of the auction aired on morning TV. The hosts used words like stunning and twist and didn't bother concealing the glee that came from the spectacle of a high-status man being dressed down without a raised voice. He looked up at the chalkboard and realized his hand was shaking. He texted Katrina, "We can salvage this. Coffee?" The typing dots appeared, then disappeared. A minute later, lose my number. He imagined with detached curiosity what her world felt like. Emails she would return, calls she would avoid, the calculus she would do about whether to stay at a firm that had just watched her attached to a cautionary tale. He thought of going home and realized he no longer knew where that was. Somewhere uptown, in a rental car, a courier delivered an envelope to the front desk of a hotel where the room was registered under a name that was and wasn't his. Inside the envelope, papers, no theatrics, no insults, only clean lines. Grounds, infidelity, irreconcilable differences. Terms, personal effects retained. Inheritance untouched. Child support to a neutral trust. Name to be reclaimed. He read the language 3 times and told himself to be angry. What he felt instead was a chasm opening where habit had lived. In the lobby mirror, a man adjusted a tie that no longer implied a job. He looked tired. He looked like a person who had mistaken visibility for value. He did not text her. He did not know how anymore. The loft Donovan leased by Monday morning lived in a building that had spent a decade pretending not to be beautiful. Exposed brick met white plaster. Light pooled on a battered wood floor. Windows opened on a street that had opinions about food trucks. It felt like a place where work could be argued into being. "This is your canvas," Donovan said, and the words were not metaphor. They were a key. They put a folding table in the middle of the raw space and called it a desk. They brought in 2 chairs that didn't match. They wrote names on a whiteboard with dry erase markers that were already drying out. She hired the woman who returned her email with bullet points and receipts, operations, and the man who replied with a PDF of sketch overlays, design. They ate lunch standing up the first week. They made lists. On Wednesday, Senator Michelson came by with an aide who took notes like a court reporter. On Thursday, a city planner she admired arrived with a stack of maps that smelled like toner and old hope. On Friday, Donovan brought coffee and a spreadsheet. "This is the first tranche," he said. "It's a bridge, not a blank check. You'll raise the rest. You'll hate it. You'll get good at it." "I already hate it," she said, smiling, and he grinned back because he liked competence more than he liked ease. They walked sites with politicians in hard hats and local grandmothers in church hats. They took community meetings where the first 20 minutes were neighbors telling the city what the city had done to them last time. They listened. They brought renderings printed on foam board that reflected not a fantasy, but a block. At one meeting, a teenage girl sitting in the back with her backpack in her lap raised her hand and asked, "Do we get to plant anything?" "Yes," Bryony said, "and we'll pay you for it." The girl nodded in a way that said, "I will believe you when you do it." Press requests kept coming. Some she took, most she declined. She learned, quickly, the difference between telling a story to move a project and telling a story to feed a beast. She drafted op-eds that explained carbon sinks in plain language. She said the word lungs on TV once and then stopped saying it so it wouldn't turn into a brand she didn't control. At night, she walked until her ankles did protest, and then kept walking anyway, measuring blocks with the same brain that once measured lines on a sonogram. She knew exactly how long it took to get from the proposed Greenway entrance to the subway. She knew where afternoon shade fell, where winter wind knifed through. Donovan was present without hovering. He had opinions about timing and optics, but rarely about design. When he did drift into details, she reminded him gently that beams were her department. He backed up with a hand raised in surrender and a pleased expression he tried to hide. Once, in the quiet of the loft after the others had left, she asked him, "Why didn't you build this yourself years ago? You could have." "I could have paid for a version," he said. "Money can simulate a lot. It can't simulate the person for whom the work is non-negotiable." She thought about that for a long time. Then she said, "My grandmother would have liked you." "I would have liked your grandmother," he said. The line between gratitude and partnership stayed defined by behavior. He introduced her as founder, never the woman I'm backing, never the talent. He let her make mistakes and helped her correct them without the "I told you" so that adults too often tuck into their support. When the first check cleared from a donor she'd courted herself, he emailed one word: builder. The divorce proceeded with the same understated efficiency as the envelope. There were no scenes in parking lots, no performative weeping. There was a brief civil meeting in a room with a carpet designed to look expensive. There was a pen that wrote with a flourish she hated. There was a judge who looked tired and kind. When it was done, she went to her grandmother's grave with a small bouquet of something wild, sat on the grass and told the stone 3 stories. About the night, about the loft, about the girl who asked to plant. She only cried during the 3rd. The baby grew heavy and then lighter, and then heavy again as he rolled and tested muscle and timing. She started talking to him while standing by the window each morning, telling him what could be seen from each angle, what had been there before, what might be there when he was 5, when he was 15. She told him that some people would smile and tell him not to be so eager, and that he should return the smile and ignore the command. On a Tuesday in late winter, wind hard enough to break umbrellas pushed her sideways on a Bronx sidewalk. Her team gathered in an unheated space under a trestle bridge and squinted at a map clipped to an easel. "This stretch," her design lead said, tapping the page where a dashed line cut through old rail. "Elevation is good. We can carve a ramp that meets ADA without feeling like an apology." She nodded, feeling the click that engineers live for when constraints line up and something honest emerges. "We'll anchor with a community garden here," she said. "Chairs on rails so grandmothers can rearrange shade without asking a city employee. Keep plantings low near entrances for sightlines. Tall in the middle for summer." "Jobs?" the ops lead asked. "Seed them, 50 training slots, pay above minimum, guaranteed interviews for maintenance roles. Hire from these 3 blocks first." Donovan listened, hands in pockets, every sentence filed. He didn't speak until a man who had been watching from a little distance, hood up, hands in hoodie, stepped closer. "You really gonna hire from here?" the man asked, skeptical as a reflex. "Yes," she said. "You gonna be here next year, or this one of them politician things?" "We'll still be here, and if I'm not, call me," she said, handing him a card with a number that rang a phone she answered. He took the card and looked at it the way someone looks at tickets that might be real. "Okay," he said, leaving as quietly as he had come. "Every block," Donovan murmured as they packed up. "You earn it." "Good," she said. "I don't want anything we can't earn." That night, at the loft, they wrote a grant proposal together like a duet. Her building the skeleton, Donovan arguing the paragraph that would be quoted 3 years later. "You hate commas," he said. "I hate commas that apologize for thinking." He laughed. "God help your copy editors." She stretched her back, her body moving in ways that surprised her. "God help anyone who thinks I'm a mascot," she said. "None left in this room," he replied. Spring didn't so much arrive as lose patience with winter. Snow degraded into bitter grey, and then into rivulets that paved the streets dark. On a Monday morning that smelled like thawing earth, the lease on the Greenway's first section was approved. The signatures felt like the end of one story and the start of one with cranes. They took photographs, because you mark starts. In one, Bryony is laughing at something a neighbour shouted. In another, she is serious, looking past the camera to a place only she can see, eyebrows drawn with concentration. She looks like her grandmother in both. Press came. She did not avoid it. She used it the way you use scaffolding, to hold weight temporarily, to reach something you couldn't otherwise. The story, she insisted, was not the divorce, not even the gala. The story was a ribbon of green that would intercept heat and conversation and small lives. If someone asked about the night, she redirected without scolding. It worked because she meant it. Elias, in a suit that felt itchy, commuted to a job that asked him to explain to people with less money than he used to manage why their remodel wouldn't start on time. He came home to a building that smelled faintly of bleach and boiled broccoli. He grew quiet enough to hear a clock. He dated a woman who liked documentaries and then stopped hearing from her when Google turned his name into a lesson. He stopped wearing cologne because even he couldn't stand it. Once on a train platform, he saw a line about the Sloan Initiative scroll on the news ticker and looked away instinctively, as if sunlight had suddenly found him without his permission. He thought about texting. He thought about the black card he'd once found in a drawer but never used. He thought about the way she had looked past him at the gala, not with contempt, with accuracy. He did not send any messages. When the Greenway broke ground, the first shovel didn't turn dirt. It lifted the corner of an old, warped board and revealed space a child could crawl through. The metaphor wrote itself, but they pretended not to see it, because heavy-handedness ruins true things. People came with gloves. People came with strollers. Someone played brass badly and then better. A news anchor filmed a segment on heat islands and mispronounced sedum, and an auntie corrected her, and the anchor laughed and corrected herself, and the auntie was famous in the neighborhood for 2 days. Bryony stood on newly swept concrete and felt panic unfurl and then fold back obediently. She was getting good at telling it where to sleep. She delegated. She walked. She sat when she had to. She learned to say no to meetings that would be flattering, but not useful. She learned to say yes to teenagers who wanted to paint a mural and to tell them no when their first draft looked like a beer ad. Donovan arrived with coffee and left with 5 numbers written on a napkin. He stood a little apart sometimes, eyes scanning like a sentry who trusts the builders but doesn't trust the world. He did not touch her. He did not hover. Once, as a forklift beeped its slow way across a lot, he said, "This is what money should sound like," and she understood him without asking for a footnote. The last weeks of pregnancy felt like the first weeks of a project. All planning, no visible progress, everyone asking for updates you could not give. She stopped caring whether strangers thought she looked tired. When she rubbed her belly in a meeting, men stopped talking, which she found both infuriating and briefly useful. She developed the habit of drinking cold water before calling anyone who worried her, so her voice would be low and certain. Her son came on a rainy morning that turned the city into a watercolor. It was not cinematic. It was work and breath and pain and a series of competent strangers using kindness like a tool. When the small, slippery fact of him arrived, the room made a noise that made everything else stupid. "He looks like he has opinions," Donovan said later, standing at the foot of the hospital bed with an expression he tried to render neutral, and failed. He had brought flowers that looked out of place under fluorescent lighting and a book of parks with dog-eared pages. "He will," she said, bone-weary and grinning. "We'll let him have them." "You'll teach him to draw them," he said. In the weeks that followed, she moved slowly, then less slowly. She checked sight photos with a baby on her chest. She dozed in a chair that had held a great-aunt through 3 wars. She cried once because the bread went stale, and then laughed at herself, and ate it anyway with butter and sugar, the way her grandmother had taught her when she was small. Visitors came and left and promised to stop by the greenway when the trees leafed out. Elias did not come. She didn't ask him to. The trust account appeared as a line on a statement, mechanical, unemotional, the kind of infrastructure that keeps families from bleeding out in court. It was enough. It was what they had agreed on. She did not revise it. A postcard arrived from the design lead on a research trip, a small sketch of a bench with armrests shaped like leaves. "For the aunties," he'd written. She stuck it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lemon. She returned to the site wearing boots that had seen better years. The community garden beds were rectangles of neat promise. The teen from the meeting stood with a clipboard, hair pulled back, focus weaponized. "We need mulch," she said. "How much?" 4 yards. "Done," Bryony said. Donovan appeared with a city official and a journalist in tow and a spare umbrella. He stood back as the journalist asked questions that were not about the night, because the journalist had done some work. When the official tried to pivot the conversation to a press conference, Donovan coughed softly and the official pivoted back. On a break, he handed her a thermos cap filled with broth. "Drink," he said. "Non-negotiable." She did. It felt like something settling. Across town, in an office that smelled like toner and lemon cleaner, a man sent an email and asked for a day off. He did not say why. He took a train that rattled over water and walked 3 blocks to stand on a sidewalk where a fence had been freshly painted. He watched people he didn't know lift wheelbarrows and stake corners. He did not go in. He did not need to. He just stood until a woman with a clipboard said gently, "We're hiring," and handed him a flyer he would fold and unwrap 6 times on the way home. That night, Bryony lay in bed with a baby breathing like a metronome at her collarbone and thought about how quiet triumph can be. No chandeliers, no auctioneer, just rectangles of dirt that would soon be green. She smiled into the dark, not the triumphant smile of entrance, but the private smile of places built to last. The city was bigger than a night. The night had been necessary. The city was the point. Thank you for journeying with Bryony through betrayal, resolve, and rebirth. If her emerald walk into the ballroom, the hand clasp with Donovan, or the quiet triumph of building something that lasts spoke to you, take a second to keep this story moving. Hit the like button so more people find it. Share it with a friend who needs a reminder that the worst night can become the first brick. Drop a comment about the moment that hit hardest. Was it the velvet box, the auction, or the final nod of goodbye? And subscribe for more cinematic, true-to-life tales of courage, consequence, and unexpected allies. Turn on notifications so you never miss a premiere. Your support helps us greenlight the next chapter of stories that honor strength without sacrificing heart. If you want a part 2 exploring the Bronx Greenway's opening, tell us below today. Until then, hold on to your vision and keep building. The boardroom was the kind of room that turned people into statues. Everything was engineered to intimidate. The table, a river of dark wood, the lights, a constellation of controlled brightness, the skyline framed behind glass like a trophy. Alexander Drake liked to think the room obeyed him. He had built a life on the illusion that rooms did what he wanted. Vivienne Cross lounged in a caramel leather chair with the ease of someone who never worried about gravity. Her gown, too sumptuous for a workday, just sumptuous enough to signal that the gala was 2 nights away, caught and broke the light in 1,000 calculated flashes. At the far end, Marcus Langford absent-mindedly rolled a Mont Blanc pen between his fingers, the faint click, click, click drilling into the silence. "Numbers look clean," Marcus said, not looking at the numbers. "If the Japanese merger lands, we'll have this quarter's headline." "We will," Alexander said. He didn't add, "We have to." The firm, Drake and Langford, was addicted to motion. Every deal had to be larger than the last. His father had called it the treadmill of respectability. His father had died before he could fall off. Vivian set her phone face down, screen flashing with messages she would pretend not to see. "Speaking of headlines," she said lightly, "the guest list is begging for a little flair. Everyone will be watching." "Everyone always watches," Marcus murmured. He was watching Vivian watch Alexander, a triangle made from polished steel. Vivian's smile lengthened, polite as a blade. "Have you decided about the novelty invite?" "You mean my ex-wife," Alexander said. He didn't say her name. "Serafina Vale," Marcus supplied, voice flat. "That one," Vivian tisked. "Don't be unkind, Marcus. We must be inclusive." She reached for the crystal pitcher and poured herself water like it was champagne. "Imagine the symmetry. CEO welcomes his past back into the fold. Such maturity. Such magnanimity." Alexander's jaw flexed. He could feel the thought forming in their minds, the one they had already rehearsed in some private conversation he hadn't been invited to. Invite her, put her under the chandeliers, let the room do the rest. "Serafina is not—" He stopped. "Not what? Not yours to toy with? Not the woman I left? Not the woman I wanted to keep and didn't know how?" Marcus leaned forward. "It's a good gesture," he said. "Shows there's no bad blood. Media-friendly. We could use media-friendly." Vivian tapped her nail against the rim of her glass. A bright bell sound. "Besides," she added silkily, "what's the worst that could happen? She wears something sensible, keeps to the edges, smiles at the right people. She was always competent." She said competent the way some people said plain. Alexander stared at the line of his pen against his pad, perfectly aligned. The room's quiet pressure folded into a decision. "Fine," he said, clapping the word shut like a briefcase. "We'll invite her." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'll have legal send the standard guest notice." "I'll send it," Alexander said too quickly. The room shifted, amused. He felt heat climb his collar and hated it. "It's my invitation." Vivian tilted her head. How gracious. When Marcus and Vivian left, Alexander sat very still. A blue notification glowed on his phone. Serafina Vale, the name still in his contacts because he had never decided what to do with it, hovered like a ghost. His thumbs hovered too. "Serafina," he typed, and paused, feeling suddenly ridiculous. A man bracing himself before a skyscraper made of glass and memory. "The firm is hosting its annual gala Saturday at the Grand Meridian. I'd like you to come as my guest." He reread the text. It sounded like a memo. He deleted "as my guest" and typed "I'm inviting you" and deleted that too. He erased the whole thing and started again 12 times until the final version was a clean, surgical note that told the truth only by omission. "We're hosting the annual gala Saturday. I'd like to extend an invitation. A." He pressed send and stared at the tiny delivered. In the glass, his reflection looked like a man made of angles and good decisions. He wondered when he had started believing good decisions and kind ones were mutually exclusive. Across town, in a walk-up that smelled of coffee and old books, a phone buzzed on a kitchen table. Serafina Vale held it like a live wire. She read the message twice, then once more. She didn't reply. Not yet. The kettle began to wail. She took it off the heat and watched steam spiral against the chipped white tiles. The same tiles she had scrubbed the night she left him. The same tiles she had scrubbed the night she learned how to live alone. Serafina made tea in silence and let the cup warm her palms. On the bookshelf, A blue velvet box sat like a quiet dare. She didn't open it. Not yet. The phone buzzed again, this time with a friend's message. "You okay?" Lila always felt tremors through walls. Serafina typed back, "He invited me to the gala." A beat, and then, "Are you going?" Serafina glanced at the velvet box and at the corner of the room where a stack of reports on literacy outcomes in the banlieues of Paris leaned, still awaiting edits. Her life had become a series of gentle obligations she had chosen. She had designed it that way, a garden after a storm. "I don't know," she wrote. "I thought he wouldn't think of me at all." She set the phone face down and steadied her breath. Behind her ribs, something old and sharp turned over. Not quite pain, not quite nostalgia. A cat winding its way from the dark toward a warm window. She didn't reply to Alexander. Not yet. By morning, the rumor had found a voice. Assistants pinged assistants. Cards were updated. Whispers drifted like perfume through lobbies and elevators. The ex-wife was coming to the gala. Or not. Depends who you asked. Everyone asked. Vivian orchestrated the music of it with obscene grace, letting a drop of speculation here, a sliver of disdain there. It would be so sweet if she came, she told a client over lunch, for closure. She made closure sound like a door closing gently on someone's fingers. Marcus was practical about it. If she comes, he told the communications team. If she doesn't, we pivot. Either way, spin it. "Should we prepare a photo op?" the junior asked, cheeks pink with ambition. Marcus's gaze cooled. "We should prepare a fire extinguisher." In her apartment, Serafina cleaned. It was what she did when she didn't know what to do. She lifted the velvet box, finally, feeling the weight of it anchor her to something she had almost forgotten. The woman she had been before the boardrooms, and the hush money check that wasn't offered, but would have been if she had asked. She opened the box the way one opens a letter from a lost friend. The midnight gown inside unfurled between her hands, soft and steady as water. She had bought it years ago for a gala she never attended, the one where Alexander had asked her not to come because a more strategic image was necessary. She had smiled and pretended not to bleed, and then she had stopped buying gowns. The dress lay across her bed, a landscape of nights she had survived. Serafina touched the seam, thinking about Paris, the apartment she had shared with 2 lawyers and a speech therapist, the cram of books and mismatched mugs, the hallway filled with flyers in 5 languages. The program had been ambitious and messy, championed by stubborn women and a few decent men. She had become good at collecting people across borders and stacking their skills like bricks until a wall turned into a doorway. That had been the life she built after the life she left. She had never looked back at the skyscraper in the city center. She had never looked back at the man who lived at its highest point. She texted Lila, "If I do go, it won't be for him." Lila called, "Then why go?" "Because they think they know who I am," Serafina said, surprised at how calm her voice was. "Because I want them to know they're wrong." "Wear the dress," Lila said warmly. "Wear the better version of your life." Serafina laughed. "It's just a dress." "It never is." The phone beeped with an incoming email, a journalist named Rowan Pierce, requesting a profile on unsung leaders in civil society. He had heard about the Paris program. "I'll call you Monday," Serafina wrote back, then deleted it and typed, "Let's talk next week." She didn't want to step into anyone's story on Saturday. She wanted to carry her own. That evening, the sky threatened rain and delivered none. Serafina stood by the window watching the city lights grow nervous. She thought of Alexander's text, the clean efficiency of it, the absence that was a language of its own. He hadn't apologized. Perhaps he didn't think he needed to. Perhaps he didn't think this had anything to do with apology. She texted back, "I'll come. S." In the glass, she saw only herself. A woman in a soft sweater. A woman holding a choice like a blade she could decide not to use. She returned the dress to its box and slept the sleep of someone who has rehearsed a battle and knows she will not die from it. Across town, Alexander stared at her single-sentence reply. He felt the strange mix of relief and terror known only to men who have passed a point of no return and are only now realizing what point it was. He turned his phone face down and told himself it was just an event. He told himself that 23 times and believed it on the 24th for the length of one breath. The Grand Meridian was a palace pretending to be a hotel. Chandeliers floated like constellations, marble floors made the sound of polished certainty, and the air smelled the way money imagines it smells, lilies and citrus with a hint of entitlement. Photographers grazed along the edges of the ballroom like patient sharks. Vivian stood at Alexander's side, dressed in a liquid gold sheath. "Smile," she whispered without moving her lips as flashbulbs bloomed. "This is our town." "It's a city," Alexander said. "It's ours." Marcus materialized, trim as a verdict. "Our Japanese delegation is en route. Try not to scare them with improvisations." Alexander's gaze slid to the entrance. He wasn't watching for anyone, he told himself. He was merely surveying. The music shifted from strings to something that thought it was jazz. Conversations rose and fell like gulls. Then the doors opened. At first, nothing happened. The light, however, changed tone, as if someone had laid midnight across the threshold and asked the chandeliers to make an honest attempt. Serafina stepped through the doors with the deliberate calm of someone who refuses to perform awe. The gown was midnight without apology. Her hair fell in dark waves, the kind that move only when they have something to say. She wore small earrings that caught the light like punctuation, decisive and insufficiently impressed. A hush rolled across the room, the first honest sound of the night. Alexander's chest tightened in a way that felt adolescent and humiliating. He hadn't prepared for the simple fact of her beauty because he had told himself that beauty was the least of it. He had forgotten how it announces itself. "Ah," Vivian said. The syllable had 1,000 meanings. None were kind. She dressed up. Serafina did not pause to gather courage. She had brought enough. Her gaze traveled the room like a scan for exits, and then found Alexander. She crossed to him without hurry, her presence bending the distance between them like heat. Marcus's smile hardened. Vivian's hand tightened on Alexander's forearm until pain flared, electric and cheap. "Alexander," Serafina said when she reached them. She didn't offer a hand. "Thank you for the invitation." "Serafina," he managed, aware that his name in her mouth had once been a shelter and now sounded like an address. "You look—" He stopped. The adjectives that arrived were wrong. Different, well, devastating. He picked the only one that didn't embarrass him. "You look good." "Good is honest," she said softly. "I'll keep it." Vivian smiled with all her teeth. "Serafina Vale," she said, tone sugared and salted. "What a delight. And that dress, how classic. Did you find it in the back of a closet?" "In a box," Serafina said with a small smile that admitted nothing. "Some things deserve a second chance to be seen properly." Marcus chuckled as if he'd heard a joke in a language he pretended to speak. "How very symbolic." He flicked his eyes at a passing waiter. "Champagne?" "I'll take water," Serafina said. "I prefer to be clear." Vivian's laugh tinkled like a chandelier testing its welds. "Clear about what, darling?" "About what is real," Serafina said, "and what is costume." It should have been nothing, a small exchange among people who would forget the exact phrasing by dessert. But the nearest tables had gone quiet in a way that invited microphones. A journalist, Rowan Pierce, hovered a few feet away, the strap of his camera a black line across his shoulder. "Miss Vale," Rowan said, stepping forward with the hum of someone who recognized a seam that would become a rip. "Rowan Pierce, Global Times. I've wanted to speak with you about the Paris Literacy Initiative. You were, if my sources are right, instrumental." Serafina turned to him. "It was a collective effort." "Collectives need centers," Rowan said gently. "Ambassador Leclerc speaks of you with gratitude." "Henri?" Serafina's voice warmed with a genuine surprise that rearranged her face into something the room recognized as power that did not ask permission. He recovered. He said he was tired of speech writing. A voice answered from near the entrance, lightly accented, unmistakably pleased. Tired of speech writing, Ambassador Henri Leclerc said, stepping into the light, but not of speeches that deserve to be heard. He crossed the ballroom like a man in his own home and took Serafina's hands, pressing them with an affection that ignored hierarchies. "Ma chère, to see you here." Vivian's smile crisped at the edges. Marcus forgot to breathe for half a second. Alexander, absurdly, was relieved that the first man to touch Serafina in this room did so without poison. Ambassador Leclerc turned to the gathered faces. "You should know," he said, not loudly but with the gravity of earnest praise, "that this woman built bridges where our budgets built walls. In Paris, when politicians were tired and bureaucrats were bored, Serafina Vale convinced us that children in borrowed apartments deserved the dignity of books in their own languages. She did not perform charity. She organized justice." Silence again, but not the earlier shock. This was the stillness of recalibration, the sound a room makes when it realizes it has been standing at the wrong angle. Serafina's expression didn't change, but Alexander saw the small shadow of discomfort pass over it, the way a woman deflects praise because she knows the backlash it invites. "You're too generous," she murmured. "Facts do not need generosity," Leclerc said. "They need courage." Rowan's pen flew, camera lenses blinked, Vivian's hand slid from Alexander's arm. Somewhere, a string quartet remembered it was being paid and resumed. And the night, which had been designed like a parade, began to feel like a trial. By dawn, a shaky phone video of Serafina stepping through the doors had been edited by 100 strangers into a narrative. The captions disagreed on details, but aligned on a mood: the ex-wife who silenced the elite. Clips of her exchange with Vivian passed from chat to chat like contraband. By lunchtime, a still of Ambassador Leclerc's hands on Serafina's had appeared on 3 news sites under the word "respect" in fonts more used to advertising watches. Alexander watched a loop of these images from his kitchen, coffee cooling into a dark truth. He had invited his ex-wife to a room designed to break her. He had watched the room break instead. The office did not know what to do with itself. Assistants whispered names as if speaking them too loudly would summon lawsuits. The PR team floated statements that managed to sound both contrite and proud, like people apologizing for how good they were. Investors' emails flickered into the communications stream. Some asked for introductions to Serafina. Marcus stormed into Alexander's office with a newspaper like a weapon. "This is a catastrophe," he said. "She hijacked the narrative." "Did she?" Alexander asked. "Or did we lay it in her path and invite her to step onto it?" "Don't start moralizing," Marcus snapped. He had the brittleness of a man who could hear the cracks running under his feet. "We needed the gala to anchor the merger. Instead, social media is writing her name on our building." "Perhaps we should put it on the directory then," Alexander said. Marcus stared. "Are you defending her?" "What am I defending?" The question tasted like iron. "Competence? Dignity?" Marcus's jaw worked. "You want to be a philosopher? Go teach. We move money, and right now, money is moving away." He slammed the paper onto the desk. "Who is Serafina Vale?" the headline asked over a photo of her, laughing at something the camera hadn't captured. "I want her out of the building, out of the news cycle, out." "She's not in the building," Alexander said too evenly. "She's in our way," Marcus said. He leaned his weight onto the desk, close enough that Alexander could smell the careful mint on his breath. "And you let her in." "Enough," Alexander said, and the word surprised both of them. It had an edge he didn't know he owned. Marcus blinked. Vivian arrived without knocking, face pale, hands shaking around her phone. "They're mocking me," she said, the words tinny with a strain she hadn't had to perform before. She thrust the screen forward. Memes crawled across it. Her face mid-laugh beside the caption closure, Serafina's face beside opening. The internet had discovered its own cheap poetry. Do something. What would you have me do? Alexander asked. Fix it, she cried. Make it go away. I will not be... She swallowed. I will not be humiliated. Alexander, an expert in moving obstacles, saw the one he had never been able to move, the part of Vivian that fed on humiliation the way some people fed on sweets, a treat she could never get enough of if it came from someone else's plate. He saw also the mirror, the part of himself that had looked away because the view was good from his windows. Viv, he said carefully, we created this. Her eyes flashed. She created this. No, Alexander said, surprising himself again. She responded. Silence. The moment pulled taut and then snapped. Marcus threw up his hands. Fine, you won't protect the firm, I will. We'll meet tonight at the Imperial Orchid with the Japanese delegation. You'll explain that our distraction was unfortunate. After that, we move for damage control and... He looked at Vivian. Containment. Containment, Alexander repeated. You will choose the firm, Marcus said as if offering a loan. You always do. When they left, Alexander let his head fall back. On the ceiling were circles of light shaped like questions. He pictured Serafina's face when she had crossed the threshold. Steady, amused, merciless. Not with him, but with pretense. It did not occur to him, not yet, to wonder if his own pretense was what she had measured. He picked up his phone, scrolled to her name and typed, You handled yourself with... He stopped, deleted, typed, I owe you, deleted. He put the phone down. Across town, Serafina was at the community center, sleeves rolled up, marking up a draft of a municipal grant with a young staffer who kept repeating, I can't believe the ambassador knows you. He knows the work, Serafina corrected gently. Her phone vibrated itself toward the edge of the table. Rowan Pierce's message blinked. Can we talk? The story is moving fast. She replied, Monday. You're a meme, the staffer said, eyes dancing. I'm a woman who needs this paragraph to be shorter, Serafina said. The staffer grinned and cut 3 lines. The internet devoured and applauded and moved on to the next thing it could devour. Serafina refused to let it define the shape of her day. Still, when she passed a cafe window and saw herself on a television above the bar, she flinched. She wasn't a public person. She had never wanted to be the story. She also wasn't a coward. That had been the deciding factor with the velvet box. She turned off her phone, put her pen to the grant and worked. The Imperial Orchid hid its exclusivity behind hush and wood. Private rooms lined a corridor lit like an apology. Alexander arrived early and sat alone, watching a koi pond through a panel of glass while his reflection watched him. The door slid open. Marcus entered with the Japanese delegation, Ms. Nakamura, a woman whose calm felt like a slow-moving tide. Mr. Sato, sharp-eyed, careful, and 2 younger executives whose names Alexander would forget, but whose questions he would remember. Thank you for hosting us, Ms. Nakamura said, bowing. A beautiful evening. It will be, Marcus said. Alexander? Alexander made the introductions, poured tea he did not drink, and kept the conversation on rails. He was very good at rails. Ms. Nakamura asked about the firm's long-term commitments to education. Alexander found himself describing Serafina's literacy work and stopped just shy of saying her name. The door opened again. Vivian slipped in, gold again, smile sharpened. Ms. Nakamura's gaze flicked over her and back. Your fiancé, she remarked politely. Yes, Alexander said, the word oddly heavy. Vivian took a chair beside him, laid her hand on his wrist, and squeezed. He moved his arm away. Mr. Sato lifted his glass. We saw a video today, he said evenly. Very impressive. In our culture, we honor those who blend humility with excellence. Vivian's smile stuck. Social media loves to exaggerate, she said. It was nothing but a dress and good lighting. Ms. Nakamura set her glass down. Her achievements seemed documented. The Paris program was recognized, yes? Let's not dwell, Marcus cut in smoothly. We have a framework to review. But Vivian had caught the current and mistook it for applause. She is just an ex-wife, she said lightly. She files papers. Social media adores a fairy tale. This is not one. Silence pooled. Ms. Nakamura looked at Alexander, not with shock, but with the measured sadness of a teacher listening to a bright student cheat. "Forgive me," she said, "but did you just belittle a colleague's accomplishments?" Vivian laughed, high and brittle. "She does not belong here. She is nothing." Chopsticks paused mid-air. Mr. Sato wiped his mouth with his napkin, in no hurry. "Respect is the foundation of partnership," he said. "What we have seen tonight tells us enough." He stood, bowing. Ms. Nakamura stood too, her face composed and closed. "We will revisit when your house is in order." They left in a hush that sounded like judgment. Marcus went white. Vivian's breath came in shallow strips. "This is her fault," she hissed. "She is ruining—" "No," Alexander said, and the word filled the room. He stood slowly. "This is you. This is me. This is what we made and pretended not to see." "Don't you dare," Vivian whispered, colour scorching her cheeks. "Don't you dare put this on me when you—" "We're done, Vivian," he said quietly. The quiet did not soften the edges. The engagement, the arrangement, the looking away. It ends. Marcus found his voice. "Have you lost your mind?" Alexander turned to him. "I found it," he said, "at the door of a ballroom." He left the private room before they could decide whether to shout or applaud. The corridor felt long and kind. Outside, rain had begun without drama. Alexander stepped into it and welcomed the shock of cold. It made him feel less like a statue. He did not know where he was going until he found himself at his desk at home, the city wet and attentive outside his windows, and he began to write. The words that had refused to be texts became paragraphs that were not press releases. He wrote what he had been taught not to write. "I was wrong. We were wrong. I watched good people be made small because it flattered my height. I used the word we as a shield and strategy as a disguise. I invited my ex-wife to a gala as a joke, and she arrived as the truth." When he slept, it was without dreams. 3 days later, the editorial ran on the front page of the morning paper because the editor smelled a bonfire and liked fire in the morning. A Necessary Apology by Alexander Drake. It was not legal. It was not safe. It was not, by any professional metric, wise. It was, by the measure of something older than metrics, necessary. He wrote of arrogance and the hunger for men to be seen as magnanimous while never risking splinters. He wrote of how easy it had been to let cruelty pass as banter when it was dressed in good suits. He wrote, "We invited a woman to be humiliated, and she humiliated our lies instead." He named no one but himself. He promised changes that would cost him. Effective immediately, he wrote, he was stepping back from day-to-day operations and installing an interim council to audit the firm's culture and commitments. He announced the formation of an independent foundation, seeded with his own equity, to support literacy programs, and he named Serafina Vale as its first chair. The building across town shuddered. Marcus read the article as if it were an assassination note written with a fountain pen. "He's finished," he told a cluster of partners. "He's improvising with dynamite." They wrote emails to lawyers that used phrases like breach of fiduciary duty and sought comfort in Latin. Social media did what social media does: praise and mockery in unequal currents. Activists clipped quotes and posted them over pictures of classrooms. 2 former assistants posted about a joke that had made them cry in a bathroom 3 years ago. The comments were ugly and beautiful and human. Serafina read the piece in a cafe with her sister, Mira, who had flown in from Chicago the moment the first clip had broken. Mira watched her face. "Is it enough?" she asked. Serafina ran her finger over a coffee ring. "It is more than I expected," she admitted. "It is less than what's needed." "That's probably the definition of repentance," Mira said. "It starts at less." Serafina's phone chimed, a message from Alexander. Will you meet me somewhere without chandeliers? She didn't answer. Not yet. She walked the long way home and stopped, as she often did, at the book fair in the cathedral square, a mess of stalls and rare editions, coffee, rain, laughter. The sky had repaired itself into a patient blue. She let her hand hover over a second-hand copy of Les Miserables, the kind with margins annotated by a student, and therefore more valuable to her than any first edition. He was waiting near a stall selling pamphlets on everything from tenant rights to bird migration. He wore no suit, which made him look oddly young, which made her angrier than she expected. She didn't want him to be young. She wanted him to be exactly the age he had earned. "Serafina," he said. The word sounded almost like a prayer directed at the wrong idea of God. "You burned your house," she said. "It was mold," he said, and this was unexpected. It made her laugh despite herself. "I'm sorry," he added quickly, as if he should apologize for her laughter too. "No," she said, sobering. "Not yet." He nodded. "I wrote what I could write," he said. "Not because I wanted absolution. Because the fiction was killing me." "And the truth will do what?" she asked, more curious than cruel. "Make you free?" "Make me honest," he said. "I thought they were the same thing. They aren't." They walked between stacks of paperbacks. The smell of damp ink and old cardboard was a balm. Children darted between legs. An old man with a hat recited Neruda to nobody in particular. It felt indecent to talk about reputation in a place built of marginal notes. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. "Nothing," he said, and she believed him enough to let him continue. "Not forgiveness, not return. I want to build something that doesn't use people up. I want to learn how to stand beside what is good instead of standing on it. I don't know how yet. I thought—" He spread his hands. "Perhaps you do." She stared at him, at his expensive humility, and at the visible scars of a man who had cut himself lifting a mirror. "If I say yes, it will not be for you," she said. "It will be for the work, and for the people who cannot afford to be decorations in someone else's party." "Good," he said. "I don't trust what I want for me." She nodded. "We'll try," she said. "We'll build. But you understand, Alexander, whatever this is, it is not a story about romance." "Understood," he said, with a gratitude too naked to be manipulative. Behind them, a boy asked his mother for $2 for a stapled zine about pigeons. She paid. Serafina smiled at the ordinariness of it, at the way revolutions, when they stick, always become proof that ordinary things are worth keeping. The firm did not plan to go quietly. The partners convened in a boardroom that felt like a verdict without a jury. Marcus spoke first, because of course he did. "Alexander has compromised the firm's reputation and value. He's transferring equity into a pet project. He's appointed his ex-wife to chair it. This is a clear conflict." "Chair of an independent foundation," corrected a partner with more scruples than power. "Which he controls," Marcus said. The general counsel looked like he wished he were anywhere else. "Control is nuanced." Nothing at Drake and Langford had ever been nuanced unless it favored Drake and Langford. They voted to remove Alexander as managing partner, a redundancy given his step back, but satisfying to men who needed paperwork to prove the world obeyed them. Marcus sent a letter to the press that managed to read like a scolding parent. A leak suggested impropriety between Alexander and Serafina because when men lose the narrative, they go for the oldest weapon. The Foundation's inbox flooded with acidic questions. Rowan Pierce called Serafina and asked carefully, "Do you want to go on record?" "About what?" she said. "The idea that women can only enter a room if they're somebody's past or prize." She sighed. "Rowan, write about the library we opened last month in a laundromat. Write about the 2 girls who are reading to their little brothers while their mother works the night shift." "I will," he said, "but the machine wants a different story." "Then break it," she said. Alexander moved through it all with a calm that people mistook for strategy. In truth, he was tired in his bones. He read the board's letter. He filed his resignation formalities. He transferred equity into the foundation anyway and created a trust for junior staff whose names had never been on press releases. He had a vision of employees walking into their apartments without the dread he had carried into his penthouse. It felt like penance. It felt like something like justice. Marcus wasn't finished. He called a meeting in the same boardroom where the invitation had been hatched. "We need to talk about Serafina Vale," he said. "Her influence is destabilizing. She has compromised Alexander." "She was compromised by him," someone muttered, breaking the firm's custom of quiet misogyny. Marcus ignored it, flipped to a slide, and displayed emails, snippets of correspondence from years prior between Serafina and staffers inside the firm about a charitable project Alexander had proposed to sponsor and then abandoned when it threatened to anger a donor. It was nothing scandalous. It looked like a woman doing free labor to make rich men look benevolent. But Marcus made the timeline a story of manipulation. "She embedded herself," he said. "She is not clean." The door opened. Alexander stepped in, uninvited, very calm. "Marcus," he said, "if you're going to smear someone, you should pick better ink." He placed a thin file on the table. "You've been siphoning finder's fees to a shell for 3 years. I didn't know because I didn't look. I didn't look because you were making me rich." A murmur ran like electricity. Marcus's face went a color usually reserved for coral reefs. "You can deny it," Alexander said, "and this will go to an investigator who will enjoy the day. Or you can end this quietly, return what you stole, and sit down somewhere that isn't a boardroom for a very long time." Marcus laughed. It sounded like aluminum. "You can't?" "I can," Alexander said, "and I will. If the firm survives, it will be because the people who built it below you deserve to keep it, not because you do." Marcus looked at the general counsel. Counsel adjusted his tie and stared at a stain in the carpet. He had found something to admire there. Vivian texted Marcus after the meeting, "You should have gone for her throat." He did not reply. He was busy speaking to a man who wore a badge and loved subpoenas. That night, Alexander walked past the Grand Meridian purely to test his immunity. The doorman nodded. A woman in a cobalt dress laughed in a way that healed nothing but hurt less. He did not go in. He went to the cathedral square. Serafina sat on the low wall with a paper cup of tea and her back to the city's most expensive street. He sat beside her, leaving the distance calculations to her. "They tried," she said. "They always do," he said. They watched a girl teach her grandmother how to use a smartphone. They watched the old man in the hat pack his poems into a bag that had seen more winters than the rest of them. "I don't know how to make this right," Alexander said. "You can't," Serafina replied. "Making it right would mean none of it happened. That's not on offer. All you can do is tell the truth and keep paying the bill." "I can do that," he said. "Then do," she said. "Start tomorrow and the day after that. It's not a speech. It's a habit." He nodded. "You'll lead the foundation." "I'll lead the work," she said. "You will make the phone calls I don't want to make. We will not confuse those jobs." He smiled. "Yes, Chair Vale." "Don't," she said dryly, but he heard the warmth she was not in the mood to deny. The foundation rented 2 floors above a grocery store in a neighborhood whose graffitied alleys had better stories than most annual reports. Serafina refused polished steel. She wanted wood tables, second-hand chairs, and a wall long enough to map every program like a constellation that obeyed none of the old physics. They called it the Vale Collective, at the insistence of a board member who argued that naming it after Serafina would force donors to admit what they were asking her to carry. She argued back and lost on purpose, because sometimes the fight isn't worth the bruise. Alexander arrived early the first morning and carried in boxes like a penitent. "There's coffee," he said, "and mugs." "We'll need more tables," Serafina said, glancing at the crowd of volunteers and staffers who were already building a library out of broken bookcases. "And a better printer, and someone who loves spreadsheets more than I do." "On it," he said. He meant it. He spent the day ordering supplies and the evening on the phone with city officials who had read his op-ed and decided to dislike him more but respect him differently. They didn't move fast because they refused to mistake speed for virtue. Still, momentum found them. A laundromat library in the South Quarter, a grants program that paid community translators a living wage, a mobile reading room that parked outside soccer fields on Saturdays. The ambassador visited with a check and a rumor about a pilot program in Marseille. Rowan Pierce wrote a piece with the headline, "After the Fall, a Foundation," and filled it with interviews from women who did the evening shift after the evening shift. And then came the smear. A tabloid with a name that sounded like cough syrup ran a story about cozy arrangements between Alexander Drake and the chair of his foundation. They printed a photograph of them sitting 3 feet apart on the cathedral wall, the caption dripping with implication. The old picture of Serafina at the gala next to Vivienne's meme-lashed face made a return. The internet did the internet again, donors called with nervous jokes. "Of course we support the work," one said, "but can you assure us that governance is proper?" "Did you ask the firm that when it was run like a fraternity?" Serafina asked, cordially bored. The donor cleared his throat and decided to make his check smaller. Alexander read the headline and felt his blood thud in his ears. He wanted to burn something in front of a courthouse. He settled for writing a plain, specific statement about governance structures and the board's independence, and then he shut up, because he was learning. Serafina did not shut up. She went on radio and television and then to a town hall in a school gym and told the same story 3 times in 3 registers. "I was married to a man who lived in glass towers. I chose to leave. I chose to work. He is choosing now, and I'm holding him to those choices. If you want gossip, find a different theatre. If you want a place where your neighbour's child can borrow a book in her mother's language, donate to your local library. If you want to help us, you will not ask me to perform contrition for being in a photograph with someone I am not sleeping with." The clip did numbers. Privately, she and Alexander argued about messaging, about money. He wanted to prove he wasn't steering. She wanted him to steer when the road narrowed. They learned the rhythm of each other's competence the way dancers learn a partner's balance. Sometimes they stepped on each other's feet. Sometimes they startled themselves with grace. One evening, after a meeting with a city agency that had ended with the agency wanting a selfie, Alexander lingered by the window while the staff trickled out, leaving the room muddied with laughter and paper. Serafina was cross-referencing a spreadsheet with a handwritten donor list because she was the kind of leader who trusted both numbers and handwriting. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked the glass, meaning the firm, the certainty, the way rooms used to quiet when he entered. "I miss not thinking about printers," she said without looking up, "and sometimes I miss silence. Do you?" He considered. "I miss knowing what my job was," he said. "I miss my father believing I was doing exactly what he told me to do." She glanced up, surprised by the softness in his voice. "And now?" "Now I tell him things he didn't live long enough to understand," Alexander said, "and I try not to lie." She smiled. He would have liked that, she said, though she had never met the man. They stayed late because that is how you build anything worth keeping. When they finally left, the street was empty of everything but the sound of their shoes and a cat that belonged to nobody and everyone. At the corner, they paused. "Good night, Alexander," Serafina said. "Good night, Serafina," he answered, and the names were not prayers anymore. They were simply ways to tell 2 people apart under a street lamp. Vivienne's last act came dressed as concern. An email arrived from an anonymous account with attachments, a series of internal memos from the foundation, selectively clipped, framed to suggest favors to donors in exchange for quiet support. It was a neat fiction built from true pieces, a reflection that could pass a hallway glance. Rowan called Serafina before she saw it. "You're about to have a bad afternoon," he said. "Do you want to respond on the record?" "Always," she said. "But first, I need to read what I apparently wrote." With the board's consent, the foundation posted the full memos within hours, with context, signatures, and timestamps. They explained how grant-making works when you invite communities to steer the money. They explained a phrase, trusted partner, that had been treated like a crime by people who have never trusted anyone but themselves. They did not insult anyone's intelligence. They assumed good faith and were therefore accused of naivete by people allergic to it. Vivian, meanwhile, sent direct messages to 3 donors. "You deserve to know the truth, darling." One forwarded it to Alexander, who stared at his phone a long time and then typed, "Vivian, go be extraordinary somewhere else." She replied, "You think you're better now." He did not respond. He thought he was trying. Ambassador Leclerc stepped into the fray with a letter so clean it felt like mountain air. He vouched for the foundation's processes and for Serafina's stubborn insistence on putting mothers in the room when men talked about budgets. He wrote, "Your city will be measured by what it does with its most dignified citizens. Serafina Vale is one. Act accordingly." The letter was shared by people who never read letters. The donors calmed. The smear faded, bored by its own lack of traction. Vivian moved on to a new party somewhere with fresher prey. The firm, bruised and still standing, announced a structural overhaul with a seriousness that made Alexander unexpectedly proud of a machine he had once only loved for its speed. Rowan published his profile at last. He called it "The Woman Who Declined the Crown" and filled it with the details most profiles overlook: the chipped coffee cup, the midnight blue hem caught on a stair, the way Serafina writes names slower than numbers. He quoted Alexander once, and only once. "She taught me that apology is a verb you conjugate in public." On a damp spring evening, the Vale Collective opened a reading room on the ground floor of a public housing building. There were paper flowers taped to the walls, and a banner drawn by 3rd graders that read, "We read here," in 3 languages. Alexander arrived carrying a box of picture books he had bought without asking if they were needed, and was told gently that they were needed, and also that they would have bought them anyway. He felt useful and unnecessary in the exact right ratio. Parents drifted in. A teenager taught a child chess with rules that were clearly invented on the spot. A grandmother sat with a newspaper and read every word. Ambassador Leclerc leaned against a doorframe, hands in pockets, and smiled like a man who collects good endings. Serafina stood at the front with a microphone that didn't work. She didn't need it. "This began," she said, "as a joke told by people who thought they owned the room. Tonight it is a room owned by the people in it." Cheers, real and soft. She continued, "We will get some things wrong. We will get some things right. We will listen. We will not be perfect. We will be public." When the ribbon was cut and the room belonged to the children, Alexander found her by the window, where she liked to take her breath. The rain had started again, the city practicing for storms. "You did this," he said, meaning the room, the laughter, the strange peace that arrives when you stop performing the wrong story. "We did this," she corrected automatically, then shook her head. "No, they did this." "Thank God," he said, and neither of them needed to specify which God they meant. He looked at her, and she looked back. The gaze of 2 people who had shared a life, and then shared a ruin, and then shared something else that doesn't have a name because names are too tidy. "I'm not going to ask you anything I don't already know the answer to," he said. "But I am going to say this. I am grateful to be in the room you own." "I don't own it," she said. "I only keep the lights on." "That's ownership enough," he said, "for now." They stood like that, not touching, not needing to, watching a girl pick up a book and carry it like a torch into a future neither of them would fully see. Outside on the wet street, a bus sighed. Upstairs, a radio played a song that had no right to be as perfect as it was for the moment. Alexander thought of the boardroom where he had sent a text like a knife disguised as an invitation. He thought of the doors opening at the Grand Meridian, of midnight entering like a fact. He thought of the way a man can spend a lifetime on the wrong side of a mirror. "Good night, Serafina," he said. She smiled. "Good night, Alexander." He left, holding nothing but damp air and a sense that, finally, the room was doing what it wanted. He expected no forgiveness. He had been granted something stranger and sturdier, a chance to keep showing up without needing to be the center. Behind him, Serafina turned off the lights one by one, not to end anything but to mark the beginning of a habit. In the dim, she could still see the shapes of the tables, the chairs waiting for bodies, the shelves ready for books. Everything looked for a breath like a city that had learned how to read itself. And if anyone passing by that night glanced through the window and wondered at the woman standing calm in the near dark, they might have thought, goddess. She would have rejected the title. She would have accepted the work.